Hi everyone. Yes, Chris Dalglish from South of Scotland Community Housing. I will talk about, give you an overview of our work and of what's happening in Scotland generally, and then hand over to Mike. Mike, you'll talk to us about some of the particular projects that are relevant here. Ben, if you could share the slides, please, that'd be great. So while we're waiting for that, South of Scotland Community Housing. So we're a charity. We were originally established in 2006, so almost 20 years old now. Originally working in one area in the southwest of Scotland, but in 2020 we were reconstituted, adopted a new constitution and a new name, South of Scotland Community Housing, to reflect the fact that in 2020 we expanded our remit to cover the whole of the south of Scotland. And I have a map in a minute which will show you where we mean by that. We're a community-led housing enabler. So the model of housing that we promote is one that brings homes into, or builds homes that are in permanent community ownership. It's perhaps worth noting that the model that we've just heard from Belgium, where ownership of the land can be separated from ownership of the buildings, and the land can be taken into community ownership. The Scottish legal system doesn't allow that separation. So when we talk about community ownership, it's community ownership of everything. The land and the buildings has to be kept together as one property. So permanent community ownership of land and buildings, and permanent affordability of homes is the goal we're aiming for here. For us, the model of community-led housing is that housing is seen as part of a much bigger community development effort. So the communities we work with, the community organizations we work with, typically housing is just one of the things that they're working on. And their purpose is to improve their places and improve their communities more generally. So really it's about local people taking action to meet needs and to help their communities to thrive in whatever way is needed, and housing is often a critical component of that. We provide technical support to communities from the initial identification of housing needs, so local identification of the housing that's needed to meet local needs. Often that takes place in the context, or increasingly it takes place in the context of place planning. So communities in Scotland have a right to develop a local place plan, which will cover the development goals of the community generally. Housing may be one aspect of that. There'll be other goals for the place in the community that they may consider. The community can then take that local place plan to the local government authority and put it forward to be adopted by local government. It therefore, after that, becomes part of the local development plan framework. So we work with communities at the very early stages to identify needs and to feed housing into planning around the development of the place generally. And then we provide support all the way through the process of developing and delivering housing at all stages, and indeed work with communities after the completion of housing around the allocation of homes to tenants and management of those homes. So that's one side of it, is support to community organizations who are leading on housing. And Mike will talk about some specific examples to talk about that aspect of the work. We also have a role as a key strategic partner to public sector organizations in southern Scotland and to an extent across Scotland as a whole. So that's working with local government, working with the Public Economic Development Agency in the south of Scotland, working with other public bodies and with the Scottish Government. Really to promote community-led housing, grow community-led housing as a way of delivering homes and to provide a better environment for communities to operate in. So part of what we do is provide research and evidence about housing needs and how community-led housing can help address those. And then we work with those partners to bring forward community-led housing and promote it as a way of meeting a whole range of policy goals. And again, this is partly about providing homes, so it's partly to do with housing policy, but typically it's also about, in a rural area, repopulation as a policy goal. A lot of the rural areas we work in have been depopulating. It might be about town centre regeneration in an urban area. It might be about local economic development, and it might be about addressing other goals such as climate objectives and goals, which is what we'll be talking about in part today. So a whole range of public sector partners, and in recognition of that strategic role that we play, we receive funding from the Scottish Government to grow community-led housing in the south of Scotland. We're also funding from the Nationwide Foundation through its backing community-led housing programme in the UK, and funding from the Oak Foundation, which has a housing and homelessness programme in the UK and the USA. The third thing to mention here is that we do a lot of work with peers. So that's other organisations like us elsewhere in Scotland, elsewhere in the UK, across Europe, the European Community Land Trust Network, for example, and then internationally beyond Europe through the International Centre and other partners. So a lot of collaboration around coming together to provide research and evidence, evaluate the impact of community-led housing, exchange knowledge on practice as we're doing today, and to advocate changes to policy. If we could move on to the next slide, please, Ben. So just to add to what I was saying, this is the area that we operate in. This is what we mean by the south of Scotland. So you'll see here shaded in dark urban areas. So towards the top of our area, we have the big cities of Glasgow and Edinburgh, and then a series of large towns as well. But much of the area is rural, and we operate in both urban and rural contexts. We're supporting around 50 individual communities in this area at the moment. Next slide, please. Just to say something about the policy context in Scotland, community-led housing, there's generally a good policy environment for community-led housing now in Scotland. But it's worth mentioning a few of the features of that policy. Firstly, it's very focused on rural and island areas. So in contrast to some countries, the bulk of community-led housing in Scotland is in rural and island areas. So for example, Housing to 2040 here, which is the national Scottish Government housing strategy, talks about commitment to support community-led housing in rural and island communities in particular, although also mentioning the government's commitment to explore how community-led housing can also be delivered in urban areas as well. So rural and island areas, and therefore a key policy at national level for us is the Rural and Islands Housing Action Plan. I've put a quote from that on the screen here just to pick up on another feature of community-led housing here in Scotland, which is the link between community-led housing as a way of providing affordable housing on the one hand, and then also as an aspect of land reform and community empowerment on the other hand. So this again comes back to the point that it's not just about providing affordable homes. This is about achieving community goals and government goals around land reform, which is about transforming Scotland's really unjust and inequitable land ownership pattern, where we've got highly concentrated private ownership, and putting more of that land and buildings into community ownership. Next slide, please. Just to say that at the regional level in the south of Scotland, community-led housing is now very well supported in policy. So we're South of Scotland Community Housing, we're well established as a strategic partner to the Economic Development Agency in the south, to local authorities and others. And as a result, community-led housing features in the Regional Housing Action Plan for the south of Scotland. We also sit on the strategic group which oversees the implementation of this action plan, and indeed are undertaking follow-up work around, for example, researching the need for key worker housing and working on an action plan around delivering more key worker homes. Next slide, please. Before I hand over to Mike, I just wanted to say a few words just to give you a picture of what's happening across the whole of Scotland with community-led housing, and to relate it to today's topic. So we're part of a community-led housing alliance with the other organisations you can see on the screen here. And as well as those partners, we have around 65 individual community organisations are members of this alliance, and the areas that are shaded dark on the map show where those organisations are based. So it's across a large part of Scotland. And we're working together to campaign for the Scottish Parliament elections next year in 2026 for some policy change around community-led housing. If you can go on to the next slide, please. So as part of that work for the Community-Led Housing Alliance, we're doing a census of community-led housing in Scotland, which is the first time that anyone's really done robust, comprehensive research on community-led housing across the whole country. This is ongoing work, but to give you a sense of what's coming out of that research, we've been able to document so far 177 organisations that are involved in community-led housing across the country, from the far north to the far south. Those organisations have already delivered 632 homes. 44% of those are existing homes which were brought into community ownership and have been renovated. So, and then 8% are non-domestic buildings, commercial buildings, or former schools or police stations, other public buildings, which have been turned into homes. And then we have 48% are new build homes. So just over half of the homes that have been provided by communities so far have come from the conversion and renovation of existing buildings, which is very relevant today, of course. There's also around 1,500 homes are in the pipeline. So this is a growing movement. And in the next 5 years, the number of homes that communities will be delivering in Scotland will far outstrip what's been delivered in the last 25 years, to give you a sense of the way that the movement is growing and gathering pace. But over to you, Mike.
Thanks very much, Chris. Good evening, everybody. Ben, can I ask you to move on to the next slide? So I'm going to endeavour to put a little bit of flavour around some of the context that Chris has provided and talk about practical delivery of some of the projects that SOSCH has supported through to fruition in recent years. As Chris mentioned, a lot of the projects that we have supported have placed a focus on empty homes being brought back into use and retrofitted, or the redevelopment of long-term vacant and derelict buildings. I'll set that within the context of some of the land reform powers that are afforded to communities in Scotland. So first project you can see on the screen is in a town, very small rural town called Langham in the east of Dumfries and Galloway, sort of local centre, a village, really. This was a long-term vacant, semi-derelict property that had been a police station, had been empty for 15 years, falling into disrepair, and was in the ownership of the local authority, so the local government body in the region. Here we worked with a community organisation called the Eskdale Foundation, who sought to bring this property back into use in a way that would help meet identified local affordable housing needs. The property itself, as an active police station, had included 2 apartments, which were staff accommodation, and then police offices and cells as well. And also to note that the property was a listed asset, so recognised as a heritage asset, which made it challenging to retrofit the building in an effective way to make substantive change and reach higher energy efficiency standards. The process by which the community organisation acquired the building was one of community asset transfer. And this is a land reform power in Scotland available to communities whereby publicly owned buildings and land which have been identified as surplus to requirement can be granted to communities, in this case for £1, so pretty much given to the community for nothing, on the basis that there was a cohesive plan in place for the reuse of the building. The result of that exercise has been the redevelopment and retrofit of the property as 4 flats, 1 large family home, 2 two-bedroom apartments, and 1 fully accessible 1-bedroom apartment. So meeting a range of local needs, very prominent buildings. So the impacts in terms of local regeneration have gone beyond the delivery of the property itself, but they also succeeded in providing a very low energy retrofit. So the property is now, the apartments are very affordable in terms of running cost, and they're made available for rent. And something you'll find, Chris referenced the fact that we work with communities to help them identify the profile of the local housing need. A lot of the work we do in Scotland is based upon housing for rent, where we most regularly see a shortfall in supply, particularly housing for affordable rent within a low-wage economy. in our rural communities. So what we are seeing here is a pattern of communities retaining the asset permanently and allocating the homes for affordable rental in a localised way. Ben, can I ask you to move on to the next one? This is an example in an extremely remote, fragile community called Glentrool. In the middle of the Galloway Forest Park. This was actually a planned community that was built in the 1930s for the workers who built the Galloway Forest Park, planted the Galloway Forest Park. And this project related specifically to a range of empty buildings within the community, 3 empty homes, and a primary school that had been closed for 10 years as a result of depopulation. Project led by the local community trust was really underpinned by the fact that the location here had driven a very high number of the homes to go into second home ownership, which as a result was taking the life and the vibrancy away from the community. So their objective was to retain the empty houses, to retrofit them to become energy efficient, and to allocate them to local families to help repopulate and bring life back into the community. That was successfully done on the three houses. At the same time, the school was asset transferred to the community and has become a local hub of activity, which includes a cafe, a craft centre, a meeting space, a social space, educational resource, some visitor accommodation that generates income for the community and again helps safeguard against second home ownership. So a very contained, very rural regeneration project, all of which embedded in the reuse of very long-term empty assets. Ben, can I ask you to move on to the next one? Again, long-term empty asset. This is a community called Wigtown, which is in very west of Dumfries and Galloway. This is Scotland's book town. So it's a vibrant community. It's full of bookshops. There's an annual book festival. The result of that is property prices are extremely high, and it's a popular community for people to retire to. In 2019, 2017, 2018, the Bank of Scotland announced that they were going to close their branch in the community. And the community organisation we worked with decided that they wanted to engage in the opportunity that created with the property coming onto the market. Here, another facet of land reform was brought into the equation. The community used something called community right to buy. This is a preemptive right that a community can place on any property or any piece of land, whereby the community registers an interest and will be given a right of preemption to buy that property as and when it comes to the market. Here, there was successful enactment of that, whereby the community demonstrated local support for the acquisition. That brought the bank and the banking group, who were based in London, to the table to negotiate with the community. So it was really a mechanism to create a level playing field for negotiation. Once the community had acquired the property, it was redeveloped and retrofitted to provide 2 apartments. So the upper floors had until the 1980s been the family home of the bank manager in the town. That was redeveloped to provide a large family home. The vaults to the rear of the building were turned into a small, accessible apartment with someone for someone with specific accessibility needs. And the front of the property was turned into a small bunkhouse, which is an affordable form of visitor accommodation for people visiting the book town. The bunkhouse is also run and owned by the community, so there's local employment created and a source of income created. I haven't talked too much about the funding sources for these. All of these three projects were funded through Scottish Government capital grant for community-led housing that enabled the low energy retrofit on each of the projects. I also thought it was worth mentioning that each of these projects also had a significant proportion of funding come from wind farm community benefit funds, whereby private wind farm operators are required by government to make community finance contributions for local community-led development. So that's been a key factor in establishing the viability on these projects. Ben, can I get you to move on? This is the final one, but less of a rural project. This is a project called Mid-Staple Quarter in Dumfries, which is the main regional town in southwest Scotland, town with a population of about 50,000 people. And this is a town centre regeneration project that is being led and catalysed by community asset ownership. Mid-Staple Quarter itself is a community organisation, a community benefit society, which has about 600 members. The area that you can see on the slide represents the area that Mid-Staple Quarter have identified for their approach to strategic regeneration through community ownership. It relates to 8 properties. Ben, can I get you to move on again? The key underpinning factor for the efforts here related to a very common story of town centre decline, but linked very directly to absentee asset ownership. So all of these buildings, the block you can see on the top right of the image there, which is the front of the Mid-Staple Quarter project, all of these projects were empty. All of the properties were empty, disused, and every single one of them in a different ownership, but completely absentee. Most of the owners were pension funds or kind of middle-level property investors with no vested interest in developing in the town. They were simply balance sheet assets. Following a period of quite extensive community engagement, the community organisation here was formed with the objective of taking all of these buildings into community ownership, of developing the master plan that you saw on the previous slide, and rethinking the purpose and the role of the town centre to create housing. Because of this ownership model, almost nobody lived in the town centre at all. There was complete absenteeism. To bring life and vibrancy back into the town centre through new homes and a rethink of the retail model to be focused on social enterprise, community business, and community services. Where we are with this project now, phase 1, which you can see in the 2 images on the left, the standard, completed just towards the tail end of 2024. This was a partial retrofit, partial new build. So the facade and the frame of the building on the front was retained, and the rear section was really a new build. The completed project involves 7 homes. Here we had all for affordable rent. Here we have allocation that prioritises key workers, so people working in key public services. There is also office space, so co-working space, studio space for creative professionals, so a range of different mixes being drawn into the one building. Now we're turning our attention and support to the second phase of this, which is building on the corner on the top right image. That will involve the retention and retrofit of that building to create 4 homes, again focused on a key worker allocation of affordable homes. That's where I'm going to stop, Ben. So I think that's the end of our presentation.